This kind of continuation of Chapter 5. For Chapter 5, we introduced DNS. What does DNS do? In the activities, you will install DNS as a caching server. This one gets a little bit more into managing and administering Windows Server 2008, a little bit more into the Active Directory, and in this chapter, you'll install Active Directory.
What's the difference between a DNS and DNS server?
Same. DNS server. DNS service runs on a DNS server.
Okay.
Just like a print service runs on a print server. Okay? Yeah, terminology, and when those things come up, please ask those things. Describe and install an Active Directory domain services. Again, when you do this, you can put the roll-on, or you can just do DC promo and it'll put the roll-on for you. You don't have Active Directory installed until DC promo is finished and it actually puts Active Directory on the system. Manage your DNS environment, domain name, services environment. And again, this all hopefully will roll into the one demo. Troubleshoot DNS environment. DNS is another one of those not extremely complex protocols, but it's a little more involved than DHCP. DHCP like either works or it doesn't work, basically. DNS, you can check it. Is it connected to some places? Is it getting out? One of the things that may happen to you is it blocked at the firewall? Is the firewall going to allow that in? People get queries from you? Is your DNS working? There is a check it part. You can check DNS. It will check itself. Manage the Windows Internet Name Service. This is the one, initially they said they weren't going to put WINS in Windows Server 2008, but they did. WINS is a NetBIOS name service, NBNS, when you see it in Wireshark. What it does is does single name lookups, does NetBIOS name lookups instead of broadcast. That allows you to then resolve NetBIOS names further than the broadcast domain. New features in Server 2008, and we'll probably go over those pretty quickly because you kind of need to know what they are, but because if you take the test, that's what Microsoft will focus the testing on. Active Directory clients use DNS to locate the resources available on the network. Are you looking to get authenticated? You've got to find an authentication server. Are you trying to get a key code so that you can, activate your machine? That's one of the services that are there. So it uses it to look up all the services using the SRV records. We'll look at some of those, what they look like. We'll not drill down because they just go on and on and on. We'll do the demo here. Servers you can run in the Active Directory domain services environment, standard DNS server, Active Directory integrated servers. You can have standard zones and Active Directory integrated zones in the same DNS server. It just depends on how you configure the zone, whether you tell it it's Active Directory integrated or not. Active Directory integrated, it needs to be a real domain for a real Active Directory so that it can get the real resource records from Active Directory. Ethernet adapter, and this is obviously an IP config, all right. What do we have in it? You've looked at those things. The only one that's really added here that we don't do a whole lot with in this course, or I don't anyway, is the WINS server. If you have just a Windows environment, you don't need a WINS server.
What exactly is the difference between a WINS server and a DNS server?
A WINS server resolves NetBIOS names. A DNS server resolves fully qualified domain names. NetBIOS is a broadcast protocol. We've said that ever since Networking 1 or 2 or whenever we started that.
That's day one.
Goes as far as the router. If you need to resolve them in a larger scale, then you have to have a NetBIOS name server. And in Windows, that's called WINS, Windows Internet Name Service. If you see WINS traffic in Wireshark, for instance, it will not say WINS, it will say NBNS, NetBIOS Name Server. So this is just looking at all of the things, and this is a DHCP address because it said I got the address from my DHCP server. All of those good things. The lease was obtained. You can see how old this is, August the 20th, 2008 at 10:13. And it's a really long lease because it expires at 10:43. So this is a 30-minute lease, right? How long should your leases be? That's up to you. What are you trying to? Are you trying to get the addresses back quicker, or are you just trying to leave the addresses there? So all of those things are available. The IPv6 address, and on and on and on. The Active Directory domain services. I don't want to say Active Directory services because they kind of changed the name a little bit from directory services to domain services. The implementation of the directory services infrastructure stores the attributes or specific information for objects within a network. What's the IP address? What are the attributes of it? Those things are in Active Directory. Works in conjunction with DNS in order to find those resources, because we use names, Active Directory uses names, but the only way we can actually get anywhere is to use an IP address. Domain controller, the directory services, the domain controller locator runs at logon. The domain controller locator really is based on the IP address. It's based on the site information, and sites are defined by subnet addresses. So what our machines are trying to do when they're trying to find a logon server, that's one of the primary functions of Active Directory, is get you authenticated to the network, is looking for a domain controller that's in this network, in the 10.60 network. There are other ones available. If it can't find them, it's probably just going to give up. But there are others available at Virginia Beach which are in different locations, different sites. Has a naming convention used for the DNS domain name. Naming convention we talked a little bit about thought about a little bit maybe in the lab class and in here. Naming conventions become important to your users more so than you. You can probably figure it out. But we get into these situations that people want to get their email from home, and you want them to get their email from home. Well, you don't want your internal domain typically to be displayed on the internet, because if we display all those DNS records, then some hackers got a really good idea of how to start hacking us. So when you name these things, when you set up these domains, Active Directory domain names, you may have to consider what's going to happen with your users also. How are they going to accept it? Has a naming convention, how are we going to name it? They're kind of you generally are going to name something that's related to the name of the business. ECPI, and they picked ECPI VAB because they actually started the whole thing at Virginia Beach and then they worked their way down. So we're roanoke.ecpivab.edu, related to the company. When a domain controller is added, an SRV and an A records are created to allow the clients to find the domain controller at logon. So the service records have to be added and an A record has to be there also for these things. If the A record or if the service records aren't created, you can create some of them. Actually, you can create most of them. They're just a very, very few. Global Catalog Server is one of the ones that you couldn't create. We had an issue with that one time when we were trying to migrate from one domain to the other. Couldn't find a Global Catalog Server. And they said, oh, well, no, it's checked. It says there's a Global Catalog Server. Yeah, but there's no DNS record. If there's no DNS record, it doesn't exist. When you're doing Active Directory, avoid using NetBIOS names when you're trying to see if it works. You know, ping computer1.roanoke.net, the fully qualified domain name. Fully qualified domain name will then exercise DNS to see if DNS is working. Even if the NetBIOS name is working and DNS isn't working, Active Directory is not working. Integrated DNS, the benefits of Active Directory integrated, faster, more efficient replication. The replication process is in Active Directory, not DNS replication, Active Directory replication. Database security, because it's part of Active Directory and the Active Directory database is secured. Multi-master support. Multi-master means that we can have multiple domain controllers and make changes, and they use a replication process so that they all get the same information. Can choose one of the following zone replication options: all DNS servers in the forest, all DNS servers in this domain. This is who you want the information sent to. You, as the administrator, can configure that when you add a zone. Where do we want it to go to? Designed to go across wide area network links, slower links. Sites are designed to limit the replication process. Sites are defined by IP addresses. Generally, they're going to be physical locations, but they don't have to be physical locations. Sites are something that will set up a Windows actually will set up if we have multiples. We'll set up bridgehead server. Let me see if I can make some ugly drawing here again. If we had a site here and a site here, and inside each of these sites we had multiple domain controllers. I'm going to put one out here, and we're going to call this guy the bridgehead server, and over here we have multiple domain controllers. Within the site, you've got good connectivity because you've got gigabit Ethernet probably, so replication is not a real issue. When you go across a wide area network, depending on how much information you're replicating, it could be large. So we really don't want all of these machines, this machine talking to every other machine in the other domain. What we have here are things called bridgehead servers, which send the information back and forth. Once the bridgehead server gets the information, it then replicates it to the servers within its site. That works for Active Directory. Wins uses the same process if you have multiple Win servers. So limit the replication traffic, the way it does that is with bridgehead servers. And the bridgehead servers, you can pick your own, or if you just leave Active Directory alone, it'll pick one for you and will automatically set up that way. So here we have two domain controllers in this site. One of them is a bridgehead server and one isn't. Instead of both of them replicating with the stuff at Virginia Beach, one of them replicates, and then when it gets the information, it sends it to the other one. That is how we're going to limit that kind of connectivity. Distribution of an IT department, how the network's administered helps you determine the layout of your DNS zones. And these are all things that what works for you. When you start setting up Active Directory and all of these things, it's not configured to make it convenient for the administrative people. It's configured to make it convenient for you to manage the IT resources. What software a user is going to get, that's going to be the way you set up your OUs. Any other kinds of policies, how are you going to apply policies? Ours sets up kind of like the administrative structure because we have OUs for students, we have OUs for faculty, and we have OU for the administrative because they get a little bit different policy. Each gets a little bit different policy. It's designed for you to do that. Forwarding of types are standard and conditional. What I want to do is when I do the demo, talk about conditional forwarding. In the short run, conditional forwarding has a condition. If we wanted to resolve all the other ecpivab.edu resources, we'd have to go to a DNS server that had all that information. True? We can set up a conditional forwarder so that for that condition, ecpivab.edu, it sends the information to the Virginia Beach server. All the others go out to the internet for resolution. I like to try to do a demo, see if that works. Dynamic DNS, we talked about the last time, allows supported DNS clients to dynamically update their DNS records, register themselves in DNS. And back to one of the configurations in DHCP, if you have clients that can't do that, then you can tell the DHCP server to register for them. All of the machines, the Windows machines since Windows 2000 are going to support dynamic DNS. If you have some NT 4.0 or some Windows 9X clients, you need to have DHCP register for them. Updates all their records, deletes records of the clients removed from the domain and whose DHCP leases expire. And if you'll remember, one of the Windows-specific properties in DHCP, which I may ask you to configure again at some point in time, was to give up the IP address when the machine shut down. That becomes a situation. We don't have a lot of IP addresses. We need to get the addresses back so that when the day crew goes home and shuts down their machines, you get the IP addresses back so that the night crew can use those addresses, reuse those addresses. Scavenging is the process where the database process within a DNS database that uses the timestamps to determine when the records can update themselves. Scavenging looks for stale records, basically. So it's scavenging for records that are no longer valid, and that's one of the things that you need to configure in DNS. The DHCP configuration, I think we covered in DHCP. Secure and non-secure updates performed only by authenticated clients, non-secure by any client. What a secure update, which would be an Active Directory environment, prevents is somebody coming into your network and getting registered in Active Directory that's not part of your domain, or in DNS that's not part of your domain. Clients use DNS for the Active Directory environment to the internal DNS servers can cause problems. We can use the internal DNS servers for both Active Directory and for resolution on the Internet. You may not want to do that. You may want to use some type of forwarder to forward those external requests someplace else. Some people do that. Some people just allow them to update. We use a forwarder. Our forwarder goes to the open DNS servers so that internally the local resources are resolved by the local DNS server. Everything else gets forwarded to Open DNS. When it resolves something, it gets cached back to that process. Looks in the computer for see if it's cached. If that doesn't work, looks in the DNS server to see if it's cached. Group policy, managing DNS, the DNS console. We're going to look at that here in just a minute. DNS Manager allows you to add DNS servers, and back to the core machine. Once you install a service on the core machine, you can manage it. I can add my core machine to the DNS Manager and manage DNS from the GUI on the core server. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to remote desktop to the core server because you get that same clever command prompt, but once you get the service installed, you can manage it with the GUI tools. Always as long as you have the authority to do it. Configure the server, create a default application, directory partitions, create a zone, set the scavenging. These are things that they're going to have you do in the activities. Level where all DNS zones exist. The record level, modifying, deleting records, we can have, the level is we can have zones within zones when we do these things. Round robin, load balancing, round robin is we can have a single resource that we want, like a copy of our web page. We want to go to one server and then we want to go to another server. So we have the same name with different IP addresses, and we can set up round robin so it'll go to the first one and then it will go to the second one. DNS command can be used to disable or enable round robin, and you can do that obviously in the full This would be one that primarily would be used in the core server. Don't do like student last time did, said this command doesn't exist. Well, it does after you install DNS. It doesn't exist until DNS is installed on it. Conditional forwarding, forward based on a specific domain name, and again I want to do a demo on that one. Create your own location under your server in the DNS console. This one, the location's changed a little bit. The function's the same. Where you do has changed a little bit between 2003 and 2008. It's quite a bit more obvious than it used to be. Troubleshooting, logs, the general tab. It also has a test me function that you can test DNS to see if you can resolve local addresses and then to see if you can get external addresses resolved. The command-line utilities, they were just going to kind of go through because you've used these before. Ping, ipconfig. Look at the switches of ipconfig. There are a bunch of them, and a number of them here all list all of the information, including DNS, because if you just do an ipconfig, you don't get DNS, I think. Flush DNS. If you get a record in here that's wrong, you can get rid of it from the cache with the flush DNS. Display DNS, you can see all your cached records. Register DNS will, and they have an activity for you to do that, registers the server. If it didn't get automatically registers it in the DNS server so that they have those records there. DC Diag, perform diagnostic queries of your domain controllers. All these tools are handy to know. NS Lookup, please be sure you do that because I guarantee you're going to have some questions on that come around about the 13th of June. I'm going to ask you to find some stuff, and I want to look at this a little bit as we go through it. If it starts being funny on your virtual machines, you should be able to do all the stuff on your local machines. What we're going to do is look at some stuff. I want to do a couple of things on it when we do this demo. You guys got a lot of stuff to remember to remind me to do in this demo.
Okay.
NS Lookup. All this stuff here, what NS Lookup basically is a test of DNS. NS Lookup allows you to say what kind of records you want to get and to test DNS, to check DNS, I guess is a better way to talk about it. The debug log server allows you to turn on debugging, logging, and perfmon, there is a DNS level for the performance monitor of Windows if you want to do that. And these are really kind of, this is what the log's going to look like. Something that you got to study for a little bit to see if it works. WINS, NetBIOS names, you can add the WINS server to this thing. Single name lookup, you actually create a single name lookup zone. The server and the client service, the WINS service is responsible for maintaining the WINS database, allows us to use NetBIOS names. The only reason, and I've said this a lot of times, I know, but I'll keep saying it, the only reason you really should need this is if you have applications that require NetBIOS names. There still are some out there. How do you know? You can turn them off, turn them on, turn them off. For installing the queries and all those good things. Global name zones is the single name lookup. It creates its own zone to do those. The new features, you can put DNS on the core server. Support for IPv6. Primary read-only zone for RODCs, read-only domain controllers. When they have you convert to a read-only domain controller, be sure you use the script that they give you, because that's the only way it's going to work. Link local, DNS client changes, background zone loading. This just makes it a little more efficient. The GNZ allows you to create a zone for the WINS lookups, the NetBIOS lookups. So this one, configuration, what I really would like to do is stop here and go look at some of these things that we've talked about, the zones, the type zones, and how we do those, what they do and what they don't do.